So that session looked at future pandemic preparedness. We're now going to touch upon future research and innovation preparedness, because science has never been in the spotlight as it is today. And we've got the best person imaginable to talk to us about this. We're very privileged to have Professor Dame Ottoline Leyser, who is Chief Executive of UKRI, and she's going to touch upon by everyone, for everyone, research and innovation for the future. So Ottoline, thanks for all that you're doing and welcome.
Thank you very much indeed. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry I haven't been able to join more of the conversation today, but hearing the last session, I think what I'm going to say builds on that quite nicely. I want to talk actually about how research and innovation currently sits in our society and how we urgently need to change that in order to drive the kind of more inclusive research and innovation system that we need for the future as the products of research and innovation become more and more central in our ability to build the kinds of societies that we want, with the right high quality, productive, inclusive public services that have been talked about, but also more widely an inclusive, knowledge-led economy that is sustainable and really builds right across the country the kind of benefits that people can see and can feel in their everyday lives. And this topic of the relationship between research and innovation, I'm going to say science in a very broad sense for a lot of this talk, but I mean research and innovation broadly defined. Where that sits in our society at the moment is extremely unhelpful. It's something I've been worried about for quite a long time. And one of the reasons that I am excited to have the opportunity to lead UKRI to try to contribute to shifting our current framing of research and innovation in society. So what it currently looks like is illustrated in a rather simplistic way on the next slide, where you have researchers and innovators in one box and people in another box. We have defined research and innovation as a very specialist activity done by a very specialist group of very clever people over here. There's a kind of Einstein framing that puts researchers and innovators in a different place from normal people. And what has happened over the years is that framing has embedded itself so deeply in the way that researchers and innovators think about themselves and people think about themselves, that it's become quite deeply embedded in our kind of social identity, each of us. And I think framing that in the context of things like social identity theory is actually a very useful way to look at it, because it explains in many ways how this wall between science and society has been built and why it's so difficult to dismantle. So the next slide outlines the kind of core tenets of social identity theory, which was kind of developed by Henri Tajfel and others over the years, and particularly when people are under stress. So if you're anxious and afraid and facing insecurity and the unknown, you dig into your social identity. And it's described by a whole set of characteristics where you kind of huddle together in an in-group and you favor the in-group. And part of the identity of the in-group is actually defining an out-group. So it's not just that you like all the people in the in-group and you have lots of within-group social influence, but also you really don't like the people in the out group. So you derogate the people in the out group, and that actually drives the people in the out group also into that kind of homogenization. And then you get a stable system with two groups that are polarized, and their sense of security depends very heavily on that in-group, out-group identity and definition. And so in the context of science, on the next slide, you can think of it like this. There are scientists on one side of the wall, and actually, if they're working in industry, that in some ways this amplifies the problem. and the scientists, if you click the animation, are one group and the people are the other group. And if you click the animation again, the scientists think of themselves as kind of tremendously rational and innovative Einsteins. This is all quite subliminal. We don't get up every morning and think, boy, am I a genius, but that's somehow nonetheless rooted in our identity. And then if you click the next part of the animation, the people think of themselves as much more kind of holistic, intuitive, normal people. They're not these kind of wonderful, rational boffins. But meanwhile, the scientists frame the normal people in the next part of the animation as kind of irrational Luddites who don't know what they're talking about, and the people frame the scientists in the next bit of the animation as kind of reductionist robots who are kind of arrogant. And this is obviously massively oversimplified and over-exaggerated for effect, but nonetheless, I think people will recognize this. And I suppose my introduction to these ideas and concepts came through my work trying to think about the issues around genetic modification, where you can see it in the plant context really loud, these narratives coming through all the time. And they're self-fulfilling cycles in the way that social identity works, and that's a real problem. So on the next slide, it explains why I think it's such a real problem. That segregation of the two, it stops all kinds of interchange between the research and innovation system and the rest of society. And that interchange includes who considers themselves to be part of the research and innovation system and who aspires to be part of the research and innovation system. So who comes into the system, it crushes diversity in the system by excluding a large number of people who don't think of themselves in that other identity. And then it also makes it much harder to take things out of the research and innovation system and weave them across into society. So it's incredibly unhelpful division, a very unhelpful way of thinking about research and innovation. And what we need then is the thing that is my favorite line really from the Nurse Review, which is what recommended the establishment of UK Research and Innovation, this organisation I now lead, which is a compact that bonds science and society, which will deliver both excellent science and ensure that it's used for public good. And I think this is very much what we should be aiming at. So on the next slide, UK Research and Innovation, that came out of the Nurse Review, is the largest public sector funder of research and innovation. We bring together the 7 disciplinary research councils, Research England, which works with the equivalent bodies in the devolved nations to support through block grants the university research base, and of course Innovate UK, which is completely business focused and as interested in, it's the UK's innovation agency supporting all kinds of activities in business to kind of drive up the innovation agenda. So we're spending £8 billion of public money every year, so we're obviously accountable to government. And I see our role is absolutely to work in deep partnership with everybody in the research and innovation system and all our wider stakeholders to try and build and embed the whole concept of research and innovation much more widely across society. And because of our reach, and I think we're in a really good position to do that. Next slide, please. So I think a lot of the problems are the way we currently conceptualize the system of research and innovation as these Einstein-like people doing brilliant discoveries, which are somehow miraculously transformed into Einstein-like people setting up fantastic companies. And because we see it this way, we measure and invest in it in that very two-part linear kind of way, which is shown on the next slide. So academia largely measured through publications. Companies obviously have their bottom line to consider, but also patents and GDP and all kinds of lovely measurements like that. But that linear relationship of parts balkanizes the system further. And in the context of breaking down the barriers between science and wider society is very unhelpful because that's the focus for what's going on. And we don't then fund the join up that we need right across the research and innovation system, but also between the system and wider society. So I would rather think of the system like the next slide, where we consider not only those parts, which are obviously important, but everything we need to make them work, all the people who work in the system, not just the researchers, but all of the staff and people that work around them to to create the environments where research happens. For example, all the people who work in UKRI, including the people who sit in Swindon processing grant applications, they are a crucial part of the research and innovation system. And that much wider diversity of roles means a far wider range of people can recognize themselves in the system, can come into the system and contribute. And it very much relates to some of the things that were being discussed in the last session, where really valuing that huge diversity of skills and talents, different people round the table is essential. So my vision for UKRI then is on the next slide. First animation button, which is, can you, thank you, to create this outstanding research and innovation system for the UK, which gives everyone the opportunity to contribute in that full diversity of roles, and therefore everyone will benefit both through their contributions direct and the outcomes that result. And that will enrich lives locally, nationally and internationally. And we have multiple tools to deliver that. Next thing, please, which are not only our investments, but also the way we can convene and catalyze and incentivize the community to build that really inclusive system that connects discovery to prosperity and public good in those very diverse and complex ways. So next slide, please. The idea then is to start thinking about the whole of society and to weave research and innovation right across it more deeply. And I think we've learned a lot through the pandemic about watching this happen almost. It's been very exciting. So the next slide, I think what we've learned is that that science is not some funny activity that kind of happens it's not some kind of truth generating mechanism. It's a process. And as the evidence evolves and changes, then obviously the advice, for example, into government changes. The classic box of science alone is not enough. We need a huge range of other things to make this work well, as really very eloquently described in the previous session. And science will help us to navigate uncertainty, but it will not eliminate it. So it's an incredibly powerful tool in addressing major societal challenges and in giving people and societies a sense of agency, that they can face these frightening things like pandemics. But that's not by eliminating uncertainty, it's through navigating it. And I think that's a really powerful message that we all need to cling on to, because it does map the values of science, the benefits of science right out into our everyday life all the time. And obviously, as we've also just heard, health is not just a medical issue. And I think the quality of public discourse around this is not good enough. And that's one of the things we have to shift and to drive up in the context of building this much more inclusive system. And then, as we've also heard, we need this well-funded, connected, embedded research and innovation system that can underpin our ability to tackle major challenges in a way that brings people along, that is a collective endeavor that everyone can get behind. Next slide, please. And I wanted just to finish in the context of HDR UK and data and how that fits into this framing that I've been trying to draw. So data is absolutely crucial tool in science now. It's famously the new oil. And we've seen through the pandemic, but also generally, how what the opportunities are for improving all of the things I've been talking about, actually, but certainly public health through the effective use of data, joining up this data across a variety of domains. But this absolutely requires this to be that collective endeavor for people to be excited and engaged with that. It's not even really about the system over here, building public confidence over there. It's about genuinely bringing people along, for people to be excited about that opportunity and feel that they're part of it. And to do that, we have to start with people. We have to prioritize the outcomes that align with people's values and desires. And I am concerned in some ways that the discussion about data sharing in the public domain, that the quality of this public discourse is moving into the same position as we got into with GM, whenever it was, where it's about people who understand about data, telling people who have less of an understanding about data why they need to do X, Y, and Z, rather than bringing people together to ask questions about what you would like to do with your data. I mean, what should we? This is what we have. These are the opportunities. How should we proceed? And I think starting from that common ground where we're asking everybody, and everybody's opinion is valid, and everybody's opinion is feeding into the prioritization is really important. And it's a slightly controversial last bullet. I think starting with a conversation about public health interventions is more likely to resonate with this wider range of people than starting with a conversation about how we need to help companies develop new drugs. Of course, we need to help companies develop new drugs. This is absolutely crucial. But it's a question of listening first and understanding then how we should shape the data sharing systems that we build in a way that supports the priorities of the people who are a part of that system. And I will stop there because I've run out of time. Thank you.
Ottoline, absolutely wonderful. So thank you for that thought-provoking presentation. The echo's gone. And you've challenged us to dismantle the wall between science and society. We often talk about team science, but perhaps societal team science should be the new moniker. And secondly, how do we work with the publics with good engagement to demonstrate trustworthiness as we build a robust health data research ecosystem that's in the public interest? So a huge thank you.